Hello and welcome to the No Holds Barred Witchcraft podcast, sponsored by thothwitchcraft.com. So, the magical community and people that go around and call themselves witches, pagans, druids, new agers, healers, priestesses, high priestesses, high priests, all of that stuff. From a professional witch's perspective, because we interact with a lot of these people. What are your thoughts, based on the fact that we have been not only working with these people, but also bumping into these people? Chris, what are your thoughts in the magical community? What stage is that at? Are you proud? Does it make you proud?
That is such a loaded question. Yeah, well, it's one of those, isn't it? You can't, when something like this is getting as widespread as it is, hence why all those, who was that we were listening to the other week?
Oh, I don't know. What was
What
that?
was
Was
her
that a
name?
podcast or was that?
Doreen Virtue, was it?
Oh, was that the one that converted from the New Age to
Yeah,
Christianity?
that's the one.
That
And
one, right?
obviously,
Okay.
yeah, so if you already are part of our Facebook group, No Holds Barred, then you probably already saw the start of that rant. But essentially, it's one of those things where it had to be said. But yeah, I suppose what I'm trying to say is it really depends on where you're looking at. With it becoming such a widespread thing, witchcraft is slowly becoming that thing that people can talk about. Whether or not they actually understand it is a different matter, but obviously it's one of those things that they can now actually talk about in much more open forums than in other witches' lifetimes before us. And actually kind of, I suppose you've got to look at the last kind of 100 years and kind of see things, the New Age movement, etc., to kind of see
Is
where
that
we're
where it
going.
went wrong, do you think? So the 20th century, is that where you're saying it all went wrong?
Well, I'm not exactly saying it's gone wrong. Let's just say it's been diluted.
I see.
It's a case of, you know,
Well, I suppose,
um,
yeah, when you think about it, I guess you could say that, okay, everyone practiced magic or some form of magic back in the day, going back thousands of years ago, and during times when that sort of thing wasn't looked upon particularly great in Europe, the things that were going on underground was the core. That was the real stuff. But nowadays, you have people practicing, but they're not practicing to the same higher standard or with the same amount of knowledge as people would have had back then. So you could say the plebs that are practicing nowadays weren't as to a high standard as the plebs that were practicing back then. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, yeah, I guess so. And I just kind of think, like I say, with movements like the New Age movement and Wicker, where they're trying to essentially rediscover something old and practices that aren't practiced anymore, rather than what I think they're trying to capture with something like traditional witchcraft, in inverted commas, where they've actually got some kind of practice that has been handed to them. I think whereas Wicker, I'm going to get myself in trouble again, whereas Wicker being something that, yes, there are traditional lineage lines, but it's what it's trying to practice is a representation of an older practice,
Mm.
and therefore, because they are out of the wrong time zone, if that makes sense, it's not current, means that they take, yeah, like you said about the pleb, it's a different level of pleb because their starting point isn't at the same point as where some of these New Agers, Wiccans, etc., modern witches, for lack of a better word, are.
Yeah, I think the real, if you get to the nitty-gritty of it, from my perspective, I would say that a lot of modern practice nowadays is a hobby and a fun. Whereas back then, it was 100% necessary. You needed to do this spell. You needed to understand this healing. If you get sick, you need the local cunning folk, or you need these folk and remedies and stuff that have been handed down to you. Whereas nowadays, you just go, if you're in the UK, you just go to the NHS and you've got things taken care of. I mean, certainly when you look at cunning folk practices, they start to change, and there are less and less cunning folk from the 20th century onwards, when you get public services and people can see doctors and there's the police and stuff like that. But what saving graces do modern practitioners really have? Are there any?
Well, again, you and the loaded questions today. But then I guess it is no holds barred.
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose those that are actually trying, and we do meet a lot of them. Bearing in mind we do have the luxury of meeting some wonderful clients. I think the industry is what I have a problem with, not necessarily the practitioners, but I think the industry is the one that's gone a bit skewish. They're the sorts of people that have allowed sensationalization of crystals and things like that are so readily available, have kind of allowed us to kind of consume magic as a consumable, and I think that's probably where it's gone wrong, if that makes sense. It's nice to have access to all these things, but I think it's too much taken for granted. Like if you were going to go searching for a bit of quartz, even in the medieval period, we're not even going that far back, you were going to spend a very long time trying to find that, or have traded something rather precious to you in order to obtain it. And I suppose quick magic comes from easily obtained magic, rather than the sorts of power play, shall we say, that we tend to work with, and practitioners that we find on No Holds Barred.
Well, again, there are serious practitioners around. It's just that they're not generally in the forefront. They're not out in public. Most of the most serious people we've met are not the professionals. They're the people that are doing their magic behind the scenes. And the problem is, when we think of professions, because of the way we view things these days, you think of professions such as doctor, lawyer, people that have really studied and really mastered their craft or their profession. Whereas when you apply professional to magical community or that sort of thing, then there is no standard, there is no school that you qualify from. So you'll get some of the worst people in the industry and in the magical community that are technically, they are professionals. They charge money, they get some sort of reputation, albeit some of them not particularly great. But from the mundane person's perspective, it's difficult to tell that, because if you don't know anything, where do you go?
Yeah, I guess so. And I suppose like you say, people observe it as a hobby. I think that probably was the best word you could have used for it. Whereas somebody wants to go and see a psychic or a tarot reader, and they want to see them for a bit of fun, where they, even if they do believe, they consider it as something, I know you're supposed to say for entertainment purposes only, but you know what I mean, like, rather than kind of going, actually, this is a cool craft in itself, I want to learn it, or I want to go and experience this because I know that person's really good. I just, from an age where you would travel half the world to go and see an oracle at Delphi, compared to going on a Facebook chat room in order to find a psychic that charges 10 pence a minute, you know what I mean? Like, do you get where I'm trying to go with that?
I think really when you look at it, that the West in general is very, very different to the rest of the world. And the West is very different from magical perspective and magic folk, I suppose, from what it is now to what it
Unbelievably.
used to be. So in other places in the world, you see it a lot more. It's a lot more similar to how things used to be here. So when you have, tribal culture, whether it would be tribes, Africa, that sort of thing, and you've got the medicine man, or you've got tribal leaders, or if you go over to cultures which retain a lot of their magical practices, go to China and that sort of thing, everyone there, they know how to work with their ancestors. They have their shrines, and they have their workings and practices and stuff like that. That's gone in the West. I think a lot of
Yeah.
people tend to think of the past in the West, so you look at the Greeks and the Romans and that sort of thing, as, well, the people didn't know anything. The people didn't know any magic, whereas it's not like that. Nowadays, we have the perspective that most mundanes know nothing about magic. And some would say a lot of professionals know nothing about magic. But back then, everyone knew a little bit. And it was only really for very
Yes.
specific services that people would specialize in, normally under some kind of temple complex, I suppose. I mean, you're the one with the the expert in classics.
Classical
But
education.
yes, am I wrong?
You're not wrong. But the same is with all things, I guess. You could easily go on a rant about universities, etc., or colleges, and schooling, and say how different it is from then till now, and on any of those, they're taken for granted. But to kind of get back, kind of more on topic, I suppose, it's just, I suppose we were expecting to find a different level of practitioner about when we decided that it was a great idea to go into the industry, thinking, and what we've actually found, and why we've had to kind of felt the need, I suppose, to fill such a huge gap that we weren't expecting it to be anywhere near this big, is due to the kind of lack of knowledge that seems to be out there, even in the age of the internet.
Yeah.
Again, if you go and find the secret societies and the covens and the solitary practitioners that are out there that do hold real practice, and there are, like you say, there are plenty of those out there, they're just much harder to find. Not just because they keep their practice secret, but also because of the ways they communicate with the rest of the world. Is that unfair to say?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I suppose we should put it into a little bit of context, in that obviously many people on the podcast won't know a lot about us, but we're professional witches, so we make a living through practicing magic, teaching others, and people come to us because of our reputations, for us to use magic to solve their problems, essentially. So we are kind of like, we're professional witches, I suppose, or cunning folk is what a lot of people would lump us into that category of, even though we don't necessarily just work with the Christian pantheon and Christian magic like cunning folk often did. But the problem is that we understand, and we understand when we were practicing or we first started doing this, that everyday clients might not know a lot about magic, which is why they come to us. But actually mixing with other professionals, the standard of quality of practitioner was so low, and it's to the point that even today, like 50% of our clients that get into sticky situations are supposed to be professionals.
Oh.
They're the professional psychics and healers and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, you're supposed to be a professional. How is it that you don't know this? Or how is it that your practice is this bad that you don't understand? I mean, I don't know. Should we go into more specifics? I think that's what the people want to know.
More than likely. But yeah, I think it goes back to exactly what you said, which is that there is no traditional schooling for it. If you were in the ancient world, if you wanted to become a soothsayer, you'd go and find a cult who would teach you how to do that. And by that, I don't mean kind of suicide cult. In the American standard, I kind of mean the true sense of, like you say, a religious precinct devoted to a particular god or pantheon, that allowed you to go and go, I want to be schooled in this. Teach me everything you know. Teach me your mysteries.
The mystery
Whereas
schools.
nowadays,
The mystery schools, of course. The
yeah,
universities of the ancient world, as they say.
yeah. Whereas nowadays, like you go, you know, the easiest way to go and enroll yourself on one of these, learn to be psychic. We may as well stick with that topic for a little bit, because that'll probably it'll have the most grounding for those that aren't particularly aware of magic in the way that we're talking. But you know, the amount of psychics, the majority of the psychics I've ever met have been trained in spiritualist churches. Now, to me, the concept of somebody purely learning their craft from a system like that would explain why they do not have the grounding that they should have. And that's the biggest problems that we have with clients that from that ilk are, and they're not all necessarily from the Spiritualist Church. I'm just giving that as a really good example because so many of them are, where they're never taught how to ground properly or how to exchange energies properly. They know they have an innate talent or a natural ability, and then they've gone to somewhere to foster it, and then they've got better at their craft, but they're missing what we would consider fundamentals.
Well, I would go further, to be honest with you, and I would say that the majority of the professional psychics that you see are people with natural talent towards psychic arts, but they've never been trained, or probably have rarely been trained, and if they have, they've been trained by some idiot, to the point where they don't push past the talents that they already have. You know, it's like someone that's good at running, but then they've not gone through the extent of training that a professional marathon runner would go to, or an Olympic standard runner would go to. And like the approach we take is we refuse to take anyone on that just wants to learn psychic development. We do psychic development in classes and stuff, but you need to understand before you go into that world and before you start interacting with those things, you need to understand magic in general. You need a firm foundation in magic, and you don't see that with psychics. Even the ones that are particularly good, they're very passive people, and you see things attached to them that use them for their own uses. I mean, like, look at certain angel readers and stuff like that, which have they've not worked with angels or anything like that to a really any kind of degree. They're just receiving messages, and they get themselves into
from something they call an angel.
They
may not necessarily
they
be
get
one.
themselves
It depends on
they
where
get themselves into trouble, and if they're getting themselves into trouble, what the heck are they doing for some of the clients they meet? I mean, when I used to help do paranormal investigations and stuff like that, I can't abide it nowadays. I can't cope with it. It frustrates me. But you'd have psychics that go in that are supposed to be speaking to spirits and stuff like that. Well, we used to take the mick out of them. We used to cause all sorts of trouble because obviously we understand magic and transmutation and the creation of spirits and egregores and things like that. We would take some random object that had nothing in it in the room, and we would imbue that with a force, a life force. We would create essentially a thought form or egregore. And then that psychic would then come along and we'd give it a story. So we would tell it it's a dead man called Igor, and that he got upset and because all of his family died of the plague, and that he then committed suicide or something like that. Not particularly nice stories, of course, because they always shock people, and that's fun. But then the psychic will come along and they'll pick up on that, and they'll read that energy, and they'll say, oh, I've got a spirit here. His name's Igor, and this happened and that happened. They can't tell. They haven't got a sophisticated enough palate to be able to understand that energy. They just, and they say, like, when I used to work in construction, as an electrician, we used to have a saying that a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing. So you'd get those people which, they try to take a plug socket off the wall, or like down because they kind of think they know how it works, and then they end up electrocuting
Yeah.
themselves. And we used to see it all the time. And I was just so shocked when we started interacting with more professionals that's so much the case for the magical professionals nowadays, you know. And I don't. Why is that? Why is that? I just don't get it. I don't know whether that's because, back in the day, if we're just talking about fairly recently, so the past 1,000 years or so in Britain, which is where we live, you've got the cunning folk. Well, these are people renowned for a reputation. Their reputation is what they trade on. They have to have enough
Yeah.
people that go away with the spells that they've given them that have worked, or getting the information that they've wanted. Okay, yes, there's a couple of charlatans, but a lot of the time they don't necessarily always last particularly, very long. But nowadays, is it just because of the world we live in where anyone can just start up a website and call themselves a psychic or start on a hotline? I mean, maybe we should go into psychic
Yeah.
hotlines. I mean,
And we're we're a consumers. We don't have the time. We'll have to come back to that one on another time. But it's one of those that the Western, like you say, it's a Western thing. The Western world is such a consumerist society that it will go based on branding. So if you've got one psychic that's not particularly any good better than another psychic but knows how to market themselves, they're the ones that are more likely to get the people. Which is why I've always said I will not recommend a psychic I haven't seen myself. And it's it is that trust thing of, I won't go, well, actually, I don't know a psychic in this area, so you'd have to go. But you can speak to my friend Mark, and Mark will tell you the ones he's seen. Word of mouth isn't how people find people anymore. And that's, I think, is what is so dangerous about kind of the modern age and the new age practice. And, I didn't say the W word. I didn't say the W
didn't
word.
say the W word, and I am most impressed with your restraint at that.
It really hurt me to not say the W word, but I didn't say the W word. And again, with psychics and all that sort of thing, and let's not go beating on the dolphin healing practices and things like that. We can add that into the psychic hotline one. We'll have to do one. But essentially, it is that, how do you judge one from another if you yourself don't have any innate ability, or, like you say, a sophisticated enough palate to actually single out these people? You can only go on either how good their website is, if you're one of these people that are scared to share that you're interested with other friends and therefore are going alone or whatever. How do you discover this kind of world? And I suppose that's where we've tried to slip in and focus our energies on education first and foremost, just because we're hoping that by giving out as much information as we can, that people won't get hoodwinked by these. I feel like I almost want to go one step further. Is that bad? And I kind of want to talk about ridiculously priced spells.
Ooh.
But is that cruel?
No, I mean, this is interesting. I was talking to, I can't say their name because there are some people in the No Holds Barred group, of course, which know each other from, let's say, outside of the group. Yeah. And I was talking to one particular person who we're going to nickname Lady Poison. Chris knows who I'm talking about. But Lady Poison and I were basically having this discussion earlier today, actually, about people that charge for spells and stuff like that. And, I, to a certain extent, was trying to defend some people because I understand from the perspective that from the way we work, we take the client's budget and the way they want to work, and then we make recommendations and then they choose the approach, essentially, because they're paying us for our magical knowledge, essentially, to help them help themselves. Whereas other people will set up websites whereby they'll sell what they'll do is, like I was saying to Lady Poison, they'll say, okay, well, candle, and here's a more powerful love spell candle, and here's the ultra love spell Isis candle. The love spell candle's $200. The
Yeah.
middle ground one is $500, and then the ultra one's $1,000. And then what they'll say is people will buy, like, say, the 200 pound one or $200 one, then it won't work, and then they'll say, "Oh, you should have got the more powerful one. That's why it didn't work." And some people, like, we've met people that are that gullible that will turn around and say, "Oh, yeah, you're
Yeah.
right. Maybe I need to buy the ultra one." So not only have they, lost $200 or pounds or whatever currency they're in, but also they are then going to turn around and fork out more money for it. And I would say, because what I've tried to do is defend certain people, because I know in certain magical traditions, there are people, say, that live in the UK that practice something like Paolo Mayombe or something like that, a serious religious practice with a lot of magic involved with it, that it does
Yeah.
cost them a lot of money to import certain precious resins, oils, herbs and stuff from their native country. So it does cost money to put on rituals and things like
Yes.
that. But so I can kind of understand from that perspective. I mean, me personally, I would say to the clients,
I
yes,
would
I
adapt
say
the
you should
practice.
adapt the practice and you should work with what you've got in front of you. But then it depends, because some people don't have that knowledge to work outside of a system. I mean, magical systems are good in that they should, if you've got a true magical system, it's supposed to train you to the point where you can stand on your own 2 feet and you don't need anyone anymore. What bad magical systems do is they train you a little bit and then they leave you being reliant on someone giving you the next step, because they haven't taught you in such a way that you truly understand what's going on. I mean, look at all of social media and videos and courses. How many of them say, well, they were going to learn a love spell today and you need this ingredient, that ingredient, that ingredient? And how many of them actually tell you why you need that ingredient? How many people will say, okay, we're going to
Yeah.
deconstruct this ritual and we're going to say, we're not going to do this way, we're going to find another approach for it, or that sort of thing. They're just not. There is kind of copy and paste, cookie cutter. I can only repeat myself and copy the other person and hope it works to a certain extent, and it really is shocking. But I mean, again, we've talked. I mean,
Yeah.
that's professionals. There's professionals and stuff like that. What about magical practice in general? I mean, some would say that that's been distinctly lacking. Even the stuff that's hidden underground and that. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a whole rant on itself, isn't it? And bearing in mind how much time
Well,
we've got left.
of course, for the people that
But
don't
yeah.
know, with the No Holds Barred Witchcraft podcast, what we tend to do from this point, onwards, is the fact that we are a little sneaky in that we'll take this episode, and of course those bits that don't make it in, and that we end up going off on tangents and stuff like that, and going on, they're normally 30 minutes, these podcasts, but we then stick these on our Thoth Witchcraft Patreon. So if you are, a member of the Thoth Witchcraft Patreon group, I mean, it only costs £3 a month, something like that, to get the whole archive of these podcasts and other things that we do. That basically we created it, to be honest with you, because it is not only good to support us and help us with the income, but a lot of the free content that we put out there, content that goes on things like YouTube and Facebook, you have to conform to their rules. And witchcraft today is more accepted than it's ever been, but it still isn't entirely. There's some things you can't say and talk about. A payment wall and or that would be our equivalent of our mystery school, at least online. That we can take people, we can
Yeah.
discuss more complicated things. But yeah, essentially we will be continuing this conversation and sticking it on the Patreon. But I know that for many people, 30 minutes isn't a lot, and it's really difficult to talk to confine ourselves to 30 minutes when talking about something like that. But So thanks very much for listening, and obviously you will want to check out thothwitchcraft.com.